tonight, our guest, which I am so honored to have, is Don Machholtz. Don, it was 33 years ago that Don decided to pursue a systematic search for comets. This decision came at a pivotal time in his life. He had just finished serving 3 years in the military, moved back home, and wanted a project that would encourage him to spend more time viewing the heavens. Over a previous decade, he spent considerable amount of time viewing all the planets and a half dozen comets, found every Messier object in 1 year from 69 to 70, and photographed the skies. He's always enjoyed the view of the night sky through a telescope. The projects that he considered were variable stars, asteroid studies, and comet hunting. His website is called The Comet Hunter. He's going to be here tomorrow in Salt Lake City at the Salt Lake City Astronomical Society, and he's got to get an early start in the morning, but he took time out of his night to be here with us. So let's go ahead and get Don on the line. Don, good morning, or good evening, I should say. Welcome to K-Talk and the Fringe radio show.
Good morning, Pat. How you doing?
I am doing awesome. How about you, Don?
Doing pretty good.
A little bit warmer there where you're at?
Yeah, it's 45 degrees outside right now in Colfax, California.
Oh, okay. Well, when you come this way, bring a coat. It's a little bit cold, but it's supposed to warm back up again.
All right.
I want to thank you for taking the time to be here tonight. I gave just a little bit of your bio, but Don, how did you get into all of this? How did you get into comet hunting? And we got a ton of questions sent in, and just want to talk about this subject because it is so fascinating.
Yes, I was already interested in astronomy, and I had been since I was about 8 years old, and had a couple telescopes, was using them fairly regularly to look at things in the sky, planets, the moon, stars, clusters, and nebula and galaxies. But I wanted to take on a project that would keep me looking through the telescope, and one of them was comet hunting, and I decided to do that. In 1975, when I began, there were almost no Americans finding comets, and yet there were comets out there that could be found. And I thought, wow, how come there aren't more people searching for comets? I read up on it and saw that it took maybe around 300 hours or so of searching to find a comet. So I figured it was a win-win situation. Right. I would give it a try, and if I found a comet, that would be nice. But if I didn't, I would have spent maybe hundreds of hours looking through the telescope at the skies, and that's something I really enjoy doing.
Interesting. And I think that it's astronomy to me is so interesting, and I think it's gaining popularity. It seemed like in the 70s it was pretty popular, Don. I mean, I remember having a telescope when I was a young kid, and then I bought a little better one from Edmund Scientific, and and then it seemed like it kind of died off a little bit, but it seems like it's on a comeback, and especially with some of these near-Earth asteroids that we're hearing about, and of course, everybody had big hopes for Comet Ison. It seems like people are starting to look to the heavens a little bit more, and now all these, on the iPhones, they have all these different apps out there. It's a hobby and a field of research that seems to surge and slow down and surge and slow down, but it seems like it's kind of coming back up again.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Back in the 60s, we were inspired in part by the space program. Everything was new. We had not yet landed on the moon. We were making discoveries mainly in the solar system. Now, more recently, in the last 15 years, we've had a good number of photographs of the sky from the Hubble Space Telescope, and that's inspired quite a few people. And in addition to that, the equipment that amateurs have nowadays, not just for visual observing, but more particularly for imaging the sky, has become very good, and many amateur astronomers are imaging the sky almost as well as some observatories.
Are there websites out there, Don, that people, if you don't have equipment, that seems to be kind of the new thing, not necessarily in the astronomy field, I don't know, but it seems like there's more of these, real-time online type of things. Are there sites out there that people can actually, if you will, see through a telescope through the miracle of the World Wide Web in their PC?
Yes, one of the most popular is SLOOH, SLOOH. You can sign up for like $100 a year, and you can watch a couple telescopes, big telescopes on the Canary Islands, as they go from object to object every 5 minutes every clear night. Also, if you sign up for it, you can commandeer the telescope for some of those time slots and point at whatever part of the sky you want it to point at, and see the image immediately on your computer.
Interesting. And again, you don't even need to leave the house. No,
you can sit in your living room while it's snowing outside and watch the heavens live. It's a very amazing technology.
It is. When again, now your website is called the CometHunter.com. Obviously, the comet hunting has been, seems to be one of your big areas of interest. With everything that was going on with ISON here, and I'd like to talk to some of these things a little bit. ISON was supposed to be kind of the comet of the century, wasn't it? Was that kind of its prediction?
Well, it had the type of orbit such that it had the potential of getting very bright and being fairly well placed for good observations, especially after it went around the sun. And some comets, if they were in the place of ISON, would have done better than ISON. You see, a comet is like a dirty snowball. But as you probably know, snowballs come in different sizes, consistencies, hardnesses, and so on. This dirty snowball, the nucleus of a comet, can be anywhere from 2 miles across to up to 25 miles across, Hale-Bopp being a very large nucleus. And as a comet gets closer to the sun, the material on the comet, the ice and snow and so on, begins to sublime or evaporate, and that forms the head of the comet. Some comets are softer than others, some are bigger than others, and apparently ISON was not very big.
Right. And
it seemed to be made in such a way that it could evaporate fairly quickly when it got very hot. And it did get very hot because it went very close to the sun, much closer than most comets. So it just was unable to hold up. The thing that would have helped us more is if we knew how big the nucleus of the comet was. The estimates were it was 2, 3, 4 miles across. Now we know it was probably much smaller than that. If astronomers were able to know how big it was as it was coming in, I think they could have better predicted, and more would have predicted it would not have survived its passage past the sun.
Is there anything left of ISON? Did any of it make it around the sun? Were there pieces of it that made it through, or did it pretty much melt away?
Both. It melted away, and there were some pieces, rock, dirt, dust, that continued on, but it dispersed very rapidly after it went around the sun. And so into the evening sky, the next few days when it should have been, or in the morning sky when it should have been visible, it was not visible. And astronomers tried using many different methods under very good conditions, and they were not able to see it.
Gotcha. So it just kind of fizzled out. Are there any other comets that are on the horizon for coming our way that we'll be able to see? For me, I remember it was a comet Machholtz, I believe was the name of it. I remember that being visible for quite some time. Are there any other ones that are on the horizon for us?
Yeah, Comet Machholtz actually did a pretty good job, even though it was hyped to become brighter than it did. Comet Machholtz made its first passage into the solar system, and a lot of the material that's quite volatile burned out while it was still quite some distance out. And because of that, people thought it would be really, really bright. But as it got closer in, that material disappeared, and then we were left with a comet, which was actually not too bad. We do have a comet known as Comet Jocks. It was discovered just within the last few weeks. It might become a binocular object sometime late in the summer in the northern hemisphere. I think we might have one or two more that might become visible in binoculars later in the year. We'll just have to wait and see.
Okay, so here's the big question. We actually had several listeners that sent in questions for you, Don. Where do comets come from? I mean, where do they? How does their life start? Where do they come from? Where does it pop up from?
Well, there's a very popular theory about that, and this particular model seems to fit most of what we have seen occurring with comets. And that is, at formation, creation, there was a big reservoir of comets far beyond the planet Pluto, the object Pluto, and way, way out there called the Oort cloud, named after Jan Oort, who came up with the theory about 60 years ago. And there's millions and millions of comets out there. These are comet nucleuses only a few miles across. If you were able to see them, and they're much too faint to see from Earth, they would just appear like star-like objects. Right. From time to time, they perturb each other, or they get perturbed by a passing star, or something like that. This takes millions of years, and the comet will get kicked in toward the inner solar system and make its path around the sun. Even though they might be very, very far away, they're still affected most of all by the solar gravity. But because they're in orbit, they stay out there unless they're perturbed in some other means. As they orbit the sun, they come on in. They are now under some influence by other planets in the solar system, particularly Jupiter. Most of the comets that are discovered are long-period comets. They come in, they swing around the sun, they go back out into space, and they might come back in 10, 15, 20,000 years. But occasionally a comet will be slowed down on its entry into the inner solar system, or as it begins to leave the inner solar system, by the gravity of Jupiter or perhaps another planet, and then it will be captured into a smaller orbit. If it returns in under 200 years, it's known as a short-period comet, and then they usually have a fairly stable orbit from then on, unless something else influences it. So that's the Oort cloud theory. There's also the idea that there's what's known as a Kepler belt, in which the short-period comets can come in from a higher orbit of the Oort cloud down to the Kepler belt and hang out there for a while. And that's beyond the orbit of Uranus. And there's probably a fair number of comets there that used to be out in the Oort cloud and have been brought closer on in. If something perturbs them, they come in from the Kepler belt.
Gotcha. So, like now, ISON, was ISON out there, this huge, massive ball of ice and dust and debris? Was it in some sort of an orbital pattern somewhere, and it was just a matter of happenstance that a little, a tug of gravity from here and a tug from there and a push from here and a push from there kind of kicked it out and it sent it this way?
Yes, that's probably a good prognosis of what happened and how that comet happened to come to our part of the inner solar system. Yes.
Gotcha. What about comets like Halleys? Is Halleys Comet, is it still in existence? Will it come around again?
Yes, it'll be back in 2061, 2062. It'll make a better appearance this time than it did back in 1986 because of the geometry of the comet, the sun, and the Earth. That Comet Halley, orbits the sun every 76 years. It's a fairly stable orbit, and it puts on a pretty good show. It's fairly consistent in how it behaves every time it comes by.
Are there tools, Don, to track Halleys Comet? I mean, is that something that obviously the backyard astronomer can't do, but are there scientific tools here on Earth that actually track it, or can they view it, or is it too far out right now?
I believe that Halleys is too far out at this point. Comet Hale-Bopp was observed for about 12 years after its closest point to the Sun, and it was last observed out near the orbit, I believe, of Uranus or Neptune, which is 20 or 30 times further away from the Sun than we are. Because we're able to calculate the orbit very well, we know where it is. It's just that when the comets get way out there, they're then too faint to actually be seen.
Gotcha. Now, when you've made several discoveries, and I would assume you're still doing this. How do you look for a comet? I was looking at some pictures on your website. You've got some massive telescopes that you've used. Do you set up and basically concentrate on one area of the sky at a time? How do you go about doing these things?
Well, when I visually sweep, so my eye is to the eyepiece, and I move the telescope slowly across the sky, and what I'm looking for are fuzzy objects. A comet discovered appears as a fuzzy object through the telescope, and it will be moving very slowly in relation to the background sky. Very slowly, so slowly that you normally would have to make a drawing of the comet in relation to the background stars and wait a half an hour to see if it moves in relation to the stars. There's only a few astronomers, amateurs alive today who are still visually searching. Those others who are searching are using a CCD camera attached to their telescope. They do it a little bit differently. They'll take 30 seconds or 60 seconds or a couple of minutes maybe to image a small portion of the sky, and then they'll come back a few hours later, image it again, and if any comet is there, it will have moved a small amount, and that will give away the detection of a comet.
Interesting. So you still kind of do it the old school way?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, it's. Are you pretty? I mean, are you continuing to look all the time?
I'm out about 100 nights a year. Most of the time it's after midnight. That's where comets brighten more quickly, and where we have a better chance to find comets visually in relation to those comets that are found by the search projects that are designed to find comets that one day may hit us. Those projects are run by different governments around the world, and they're known as Space Watch or Linear, Pan-STARRS, and so on. And they cover the sky fairly well. They can see much fainter than I can, so they can pick up a comet months or even years before they get bright enough for me to see. Right. But they don't cover the whole sky. They don't cover the areas near the sun. They don't cover the areas where the Milky Way is, rather thick with stars. And so that does leave a slight chance for us amateurs to visually discover comets.
Gotcha. I got a bunch of questions sent in for you, Don. Let me go ahead and post them up to you and get your thoughts on it. We've got a lot of listeners that sent stuff in. It says, Don, of the 11 comets that you discovered, which is your favorite discovery?
My favorite discovery would probably be the first. Sweeping on September 12, 1978, just south of the star Sirius, 2 degrees south of the brightest star in the sky, I picked up a fuzzy object, and I knew right away there should be no fuzzy object there. There's no galaxy or cluster there. And on most of the discoveries, I usually have a 99% confidence within just a couple seconds of seeing the object. Hey, that should be there. Right. That's probably a comet. Probably the most interesting comet, though, that I discovered was my third comet discovery. It's known as Periodic Comet Machholtz, Periodic Comet Machholtz 1. It's also known as 96P, and it is one of the most interesting comets ever discovered by anybody.
Interesting. How do you? Another question that came in is how are these how do you catalog these comets, like Hale-Bopp and some of these different ones? Is it a pretty tedious process to go through a cataloging and naming process and proving process, if you will?
Well, it may be, and sometimes it has been over the years, but it's not the job for the comet hunter to do. My job when I'm sweeping for comets is to discover a comet, understand and realize the exact position in the sky, determine which way it's moving and about how fast it's moving, which might take an hour or so of watching, and sending that information to the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Until about the 1990s, that's about all we had to do. They would find other amateur astronomers or professional observatories around the world and send them the message, Machholtz thinks he has found a comet at this position. Can you confirm that?
Right.
And if anyone had time, they would go to that position and look there, and if there was a fuzzy object, a comet, they would take a photograph so they can get an accurate position and send word back. Yes, there is a comet here. It's this bright at exactly this position at this time, and it's moving in this direction. And the Smithsonian then would confirm it and put out a circular, the announcement that this comet's been discovered with the designation, including also the person's name. The Smithsonian continues to receive observations then from around the world of accurate positions of this comet, and from that, they put all the numbers in their computer. They determine the orbit. They determine if it will ever come back, if so, where it will be when it comes back, and so on. Since the 1990s, however, the proof for we have had to assume more proof as amateur astronomers about the existence of the comet. Quite often now, they do not really want to hear from us until we're sure that it moves, and then we can send in the information. That can become difficult when you find a comet at twilight in the morning and you're only able to watch it for 20 minutes or so before the sky brightens so much that you can no longer see it through your telescope. Then you have a unknown object, which is probably a comet. You have in a pretty accurate position as to where it is, but you don't really have the motion that the Smithsonian is looking for before they can post it on their internet site and have other astronomers look for it. And that happened on my last comet discovery, now almost 4 years ago this month, in which I did not have any motion for it, but I did have a position. Mm-hmm. And it was my job then the next morning to go out and see it again, and then it would have moved, and we have two positions, we have motion, and then report it to the Smithsonian, and then they could take over from there. Well, the next morning was cloudy and rainy. I could not see anything. The morning after that, that night before, I had called Alan Hale of New Mexico. He co-discovered Hale-Bopp. He's a good friend. And he went out the next morning, and he looked for it, but he didn't see it because he only looked about up to 3 degrees away, and it was not expected to be moving very much. I was clouded out, and then the next morning, which was 3 mornings after I discovered it, I picked it up again. It had moved 7 degrees in the course of 3 days, and with the second position, it was able to be confirmed.
So there's a lot of time and effort in this. It's not for the faint of heart. It's someone who you have to be dedicated to continually go back and do this work and this constant monitoring and looking for it.
Yes, you have to enjoy looking through the telescope and the sense of wonder, and knowing that as you scan the telescope, every field brings something different. I mean, you're always seeing stars. You're seeing dark space between the stars. You pick up galaxies and clusters. You might even pick up other comets that have been discovered by others. And then you always have that slim possibility that you'll pick up something new that morning, which no one has ever seen before.
Gotcha. Tracy from the University of Utah, she's a student up at the U, an engineering student. She writes in, she says, Don, with comets, obviously to view them, they have to be basically moving left to right. Have you ever discovered a comet that it was either coming at us or going away from us? So I guess what she's saying is, is obviously if one is moving toward us, will it still create a big tail? Will it still have that fuzziness, or is that probably a very difficult thing to detect?
Well, normally when I discover comets, they're still a bit too faint and undeveloped, so you don't always get a tail at discovery. If a comet is moving directly toward us, then it doesn't show any motion. And that can always be a bit of a puzzle to the amateur astronomer, because you might watch it for several hours and it doesn't move, and you have to ask yourself, am I going to report this, or am I going to just hold off until I actually determine some motion? And so it can be kind of tricky. In 1990, David Levy discovered a comet visually in the constellation Pegasus that looked pretty much toward us at that time, and it did not show any in relation to the background stars for a couple days. It was quite interesting. But normally they do show some motion. They travel about 3 times more quickly against the stars in the morning sky than in the evening sky. And they brighten up more quickly in the morning sky because the chances are we're moving toward them in the morning rather than away from them as we do in the evening. So we do have some indication, usually from the motion. And as for the tail, if the tail's pointed right away from us, then it's hard to see. It just looks like maybe the coma is a little bit thinner on the outer portions of the coma or the head of the comet. But normally we see it not so much when they're pointed right away from us.
Gotcha. Bill from upstate New York writes in and says, Don, are there other celestial bodies of interest that you search for, like asteroids?
No, I don't do that. It could, and there are amateur astronomers who discover asteroids every night by going out with 18-inch telescopes or 16-inch telescopes connected to a CCD imaging camera, and they take photographs of or images for several minutes, and they detect that slow motion of a star-like object moving across, or they take them a couple hours apart and detect motion. These objects are really fairly faint, 19th, 20th magnitude, but they can reach them with that instrumentation. So amateurs can still discover asteroids, and many asteroids are discovered each month, and many of them by amateurs. But I don't do that. My other aspect in astronomy is what's known as a Messier Marathon, which I helped to develop back in the late 70s.
And what's that now? So is that like a contest, if you will?
Well, it could be a contest. We try not to make it too competitive, but about 250 years ago, a French astronomer named Charles Messier put together a catalog of galaxies, clusters, and nebula that he kept picking up with his telescope, and he mapped all of them, and there's 110 of these objects. When you get into astronomy, you observe many of these objects. The Andromeda Galaxy is known as M31. The Hercules star cluster is M13. M stands for Messier, and then you have a number. The Pleiades, or the Seven Sisters, that's M45. The Ring Nebula is M57. And it is possible in late March to pick up all of them in one night, all 110 in one night. And I realized that back in the late 1970s, 78. I wrote an article on it and put together the observing order for the Messier Marathon. So you go out in the evening and you begin to pick up the objects in the western sky before they set, and you work your way across the sky, and then in the morning you pick up objects that have just risen. And now, all around the world, in another week and a half or so, there'll be amateur astronomers in many different countries going out and doing the Messier Marathon. It's become quite a thing, the Messier Marathon. I've written a couple books on it, too, to help people find the objects and put them in order.
Very, very interesting. Another question for you we got a ton of them here, and then I got a bunch of my own for you. Comets, are they ever a threat to Earth? I mean, now, of course, so they're made of dust and ice. Is there ever been any recorded through history or through people that, I mean, of course, there's different archaeologists that are out looking for meteorites and stuff like that. Have through time, Don, have any comets ever hit the Earth?
Yes, probably have. And the part that would hurt us the most would be the nucleus, which is the dirty snowball, because some of them do have rock and so on in them. It's hard sometimes to distinguish the nucleus of a comet from an asteroid. Asteroids generally are in a short period orbit, and they orbit the sun in just a few years. Astronomers continually pick up smaller and smaller asteroids out there, which may one day come close to us, near Earth asteroids. Comets are a bit trickier to predict because if you have a long period comet, we discover it tonight, it will take us a few days anyway to begin to put together the orbit. And we won't have perhaps a lot of warning on a long period comet coming in. Even though it might be just a dirty snowball, it can still be harmful to the Earth. The asteroids, on the other hand, short period, usually we pick them up many orbits before they would be in a position to get close to us. So for asteroids can probably do more damage because they're usually more solid. But comets still can too. It's just we have less warning for a long period comet than we would for a short period asteroid.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's again, when I've gone out to a couple of these different websites that talk about like the near Earth orbit objects, and it's amazing how many big rocks are floating around out there and moving around. It's amazing to see the amount of activity right in our neighborhood here, not far away from us. Right, and every few weeks or so we have an asteroid passing by as close as the moon, which is 250,000 miles away. Astronomically, that's fairly close, but a lot of objects can pass within the moon's orbit from us and still miss us. Astronomers generally can predict these orbits well enough in advance so that right now there's really no objects that are expected to hit us. There's some that might pass close in the next few decades, and astronomers keep their eyes on that and see if it will get any closer than predicted. But so far there's nothing that's predicted to hit us. Right. Do you think that if, we see these different movies like Armageddon and Deep Impact, kind of these Earth-ending type movies. Do you think, with all your years in doing this research, looking for comets and being involved with being involved with astronomy, do you think if there was something that was really on its way towards Earth, that the government would even step forward and let people know?
Yes, I think so. I think it would be too difficult to keep a secret. Everything that's discovered is announced at the time of discovery. So the word goes out that there's an object here and objects there. As the orbit is determined, everybody who wants to know will know where those objects are. They can also determine the orbits. So one government might determine that something is going to head our way. Other governments and astronomers and even amateur astronomers can figure out the same thing. So it's unlikely that something like that would be kept quiet.
Gotcha. Another question for you is the Hubble Telescope ever used to look for comets?
No, its field of view is too small, and the time is too valuable for that. For people like me, I can spend a lot of time out there. No one pays me for it, and no one necessarily expects me to find anything at any particular time, but because of the time constraints and the field of view constraint, it's not used for discovering comets.
So it's just it's out photographing stuff or looking at stuff way out there. Is Hubble really advanced astronomy? I mean, as far as I would assume that it can see farther than any of our Earth-based telescopes.
Yeah, it's got a couple of advantages. One, it's away from light pollution. Two, it has a fairly steady skies up there in orbit above the Earth. And three, it can take long exposures and stack the images of many hours. So it can pick up very, very faint objects, and therefore the fainter you can see, the further out you can see, typically.
Gotcha. Jerry writes in, says, Don, I want to get my kids involved in astronomy. They have a real interest in it. Could you suggest some types of telescopes that would be good for us to start as new astronomers?
It's always nice to have a telescope that does inspire people to become further involved. Having said that, however, there's a good many have a telescope in the closet and they haven't gotten it out because they don't know how to use it, or they can't. The two main reasons are they can't find anything with it and they cannot focus anything through the telescope. And we would like to avoid that from happening. So the first thing is to learn your way around the sky. Learn some of the major constellations. Learn where the planets are, which move slowly against the background stars through the months and years. And begin by using binoculars. Almost everybody has a pair of binoculars. You can see things, binoculars you can't see with the unaided eye. They do increase the magnification a bit more. But look at some of the brighter stars through binoculars. Look at the planets. You won't see too much detail on either, and the stars should look like points of light. Study the moon with binoculars, and then once you know your way around and you feel comfortable that you'll probably stick with it, you can buy a beginner's telescope. There's several good online companies, including Orion Telescope Center, based in California, but they ship telescopes every day, everywhere around the world. And they do have some beginner's telescopes for $150 or so. A reflector that's 4 inches, 4-inch diameter mirror, that works well. A 6-inch diameter mirror reflector for a couple $100, that's a good investment. But get something like that only after you know your way around the sky enough to know what to point it at. Because once you get that telescope, you'll want to see Saturn, you'll want to see Jupiter. You'll like to know where they are in the sky. You'll want to look at some nice double stars or open star clusters. Again, you need to know where they are in the sky. You can take astronomy courses at junior college, the adult education course, and I teach one here in the Grass Valley area, Grass Valley of Northern California, twice a year. We learn our way around the sky. Visual astronomy is a good type of course to take. You don't need to study astrophysics and cosmology and so on in order to appreciate the sky. And some astronomy clubs do have classes on how to use a telescope. If you join a local astronomy club, you'll be around people who know how to use a telescope, and they have star parties for the public, and they also have, many of them, private star parties where they just get together and look at the stars for themselves. And you can go to those star parties and look through other people's telescopes, too, so you can see how each one operates and how each one delivers an image. And that might also help you determine what telescope you'd like to buy.
Yeah, matter of fact, here now, tomorrow you're going to be heading our way. You're going to be at the Salt Lake Astronomical Society, which has been around for a while, and I'm on their website. We had Bob Taylor here. I don't know if he is still the head of it, but we had him here a couple years ago on the show. And a matter of fact, on just for the listeners, on the 11th and 12th of April, they're going to do a public star party, and they're free. I know that the one is at Harmon's over on 48th West and 6200 South over in Kearns, and then the Stansbury Park Observatory on the 12th. of April, and I believe those are free events. I know people bring out their club members bring out their scopes, and you really hit it on the head, Don. Is that I've got a couple telescopes, and I'll be honest with you, I have had like zero success with them. They're older ones, and I'm twisting knobs and turning things, and I've always tried to use them in the middle of winter, and I'm looking through the eyepiece, and my eyes watering all over the place, and it's I've really had a definite interest in it, but it's the setup that's kind of ruined the fun for me, if you will. I've had too many bad experiences trying to get the thing set up, or just having too much light in the neighborhood. And I think you hit it on the head. If you get out and have some success with some binoculars, and I know they even sell like the binocular stands if you don't want to hold them, that would probably be the best way for anybody to get started.
Yes, good pair of binoculars and learn your way around the sky. Now, for someone like you, Pat, or anybody with a telescope who has trouble, first we begin in twilight or in the daytime, and all you would need actually, in most cases, someone who knows the telescope and could stand with you and say, this is how we do it, and show you how to aim it, how to align. One of the biggest problems, people can't find things. We learned how to align the finder to the main scope, so that when the object is in the finder, it will be in the main scope, and that will solve about half your problems. And also what all the knobs and stuff mean. Now, once it gets dark, you can't see the knobs and where everything is, and that makes it more difficult. But we begin in the daytime picking up targets, distant targets and stuff, trees and buildings and so on. So you get to know how to use your telescope, how it operates, how to focus it, how to aim it. And once you know those things, the rest of it becomes much easier.
Exactly. Tomorrow, now you're going to be here in Salt Lake City. What are you going to be talking about up at the university?
I'll be talking about my comet hunting, my visual comet hunting, the discovery of the comets, how I got into comet hunting. You'll see some of my background, my personal life, how I was raised, and so on, which helped to form me to be the type of person that I am. I learned to work hard and so on, and that's very useful in comet hunting. The presentation is a PowerPoint presentation. It has a lot of pictures, it has movies, and it has lots of good music from the 60s and 70s as background. So it lasts about an hour, and I describe what comets are and so on. So someone who doesn't have much knowledge of astronomy can come and sit and listen to the talk, and by the end of the talk, they'll understand comets pretty well and how I'll discover these comets.
Now that'll be tomorrow night at their general meeting up at the University of Utah. It's the Warnock Engineering Building, Room 105, and that starts at 7 o'clock. I believe that they are open. The meetings are open to the public, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe they are.
You'll watch them.
Yeah, I think
I'm
sure
group.
They would be. Yes, I'm sure they are.
Set a big, huge group up for you there. No, I'm pretty sure that they were. But that's interesting. Bill sends in a question for you, Don. Now this is where we're going to kind of go a little fringy. With all the years that you have been doing this, have you seen anything weird in the sky? Have you seen any UFOs? Have you seen anything strange?
That's a good question, because I have spent over 8,000 hours with my eye to the eyepiece of a telescope, and I usually use a fairly wide field of view. In the earlier days, like 2 degrees, which you can fit 4 full moons in there, and more recently about 0.8 of a degree, but seen much fainter. So I run across a lot of stuff, but really there's been nothing that I have not been able to explain. Probably the most unusual thing I've seen was a few years ago, sweeping the morning sky, a couple little tiny clouds that were slowly moving and dispersing as they were moving. And that was simply a jet contrail, which only partially developed and was then dispersing. But other than that, I've never really seen anything that could not be explained.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I mean, of course, that's the thing that we talk about quite a bit on this show, and that was probably one of my biggest questions for you too, with all the tons and tons and tons of hours that you have spent stargazing. It seems like some people tend to. Well, a lot of people don't look up at the sky. I change positions. I'm an IT guy by day. That's my day job. And matter of fact, last week I had to head down south to Provo, and I had to be at the client site at 5:30 in the morning. And I usually don't head south of the valley at that time of the morning. I'm usually still sleeping. I don't get up. I'm not on the road that early. But I encountered what a lot of people, it's probably the biggest misnomer of a UFO, was the planet Venus. It looked like it actually, at first when I looked up in the sky, it was so bright in the morning, and it actually appeared like it had lights flickering on it, and it was just hovering there. And it was enough for me to actually pull off on an exit and get out in a McDonald's parking lot. I didn't have a binocular or nothing, but take a look at it and realize that's Venus. And I think, again, so many people, a lot of times, not see things, because I have seen two things in my life that I can't explain. But I think a lot of them are explainable, and I think Venus is probably one of our greatest UFO sightings out there, because, boy, it sure looked like it was close and hovering over the mountains.
Yes, and it can be. Venus kind of hangs close to the sun, doesn't get more than 48 degrees from the sun. So it's either in the evening sky in the west after the sun goes down, or it's in the morning sky before the sun comes up. It's not very high in the sky, so you're looking through more atmosphere. It tends to twinkle, and it is the brightest planet by far. It's so bright, in fact, that if you're in a dark area, it will appear to cast a shadow. So, yeah, it can be mistaken as a UFO.
Yeah, it definitely can. And again, it was the first time it caught my eye in years, and I thought it was a jetliner. It was so bright. And, of course, the pollution in the sky and just moving while you're driving and stuff, it appears to make it twinkle, if you will, and almost hover looking, but it was Venus. Don, I'm going to cut you loose a little early because I know that you've got to get up early and head to Salt Lake City. But I want to thank you so much for being here. Let you get some rest so you can get to bed. I know you got a long drive tomorrow. It was such an honor having you on the program. And if our listeners want to come hear you in person live tomorrow night at the University of Utah at the Warnock Engineering Building, Room 105, I am going to make an attempt to get down there. It depends on my work schedule, because I'd like to meet you in person and hear your talk and see your talk.
Well, sounds good. If anyone would like to take their hand at discovering comets, this is a little different than the way I do it. There is a satellite that orbits the sun called SOHO, delivering images of the solar vicinity through the internet. You can go to look it up on the internet, SOHO, S-O-H-O satellite. And amateurs do find tiny, tiny comets that go in toward the sun. They don't get their name on them, but they do actually discover these little tiny comets.
Gotcha. And then you have a lot of these, again, on your website, thecometHunter.com. You've got tons of great links and tons of great photographs. There's just a ton of stuff out there people can go out and look at.
Yep.
Don,
I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much, Pat.
It was an honor to have you here, and I hope we can have you back again, and I'm going to see if I can come up and see you tomorrow night.
All right. Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it.
Get to bed, my friend. You got a long trip tomorrow.
All right. Thank you, Pat.
Okay, Don. Thank you for being here. It was an honor to have you. Good night.